Welcome to our workshop for June 20th, 2023. I'll be sitting in for the mayor, who will be joining us remotely, as well as Nick Ward-Willis, our city attorney. So let's do a roll call. Everybody seems to be here. Justice, Molly, Paloma, and Ren. Dan is excused. We also have Chris White, our city administrator, and I am here, sitting in for the mayor. There's been one change in the workshop agenda. The Dutchess County presentation of the 2022 Housing Needs Assessment has been postponed to a future date, a near future date, hopefully in July.
Yeah, we're going to try for the second meeting in July, and they apologized that they were sick and couldn't make it today.
But we'll start this evening. As most of you know, we were closed, the city of Beacon was closed yesterday in recognition of Juneteenth, Emancipation Day. So I'd like to read a proclamation that the city has drafted. Whereas President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1862, declaring that all persons held as slaves shall be forever free, and whereas many freed African Americans were subsequently held captive as slaves for 2 years after President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation took effect on January 1st, 1863, and whereas on June 19th, 1865, Union Major General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, and announced the end of the Civil War and the end of slavery in this remote community. And whereas Major General Granger presented General Order Number 3 to the people of Galveston, which read, "The people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. And whereas since the original celebration in Galveston, the United States Congress, New York State, all 49 other states, and the District of Columbia have commemorated or recognized June 19th as a symbolic date representing African American freedom with the names Emancipation Day, Freedom Day, Jubilee Day, Juneteenth Independence Day, Black Independence Day, and Juneteenth. And whereas in addition to a celebration of freedom, Juneteenth also promotes an awareness of past and continuing racial inequality and bias in the United States, and supports efforts to realize equality more than a century and a half after President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, George Mansfield, do hereby proclaim June 19th, 2023, to be Juneteenth in the city of Beacon, and I invite all our community to reflect on ways we can support one another and strive towards greater equality and a more perfect union. So thank you, and I appreciate all those that celebrated this day yesterday, particularly Black Lives Matter, who held a great event. From what I hear, I was unable to attend, but thank you all, and hopefully each year we can celebrate this in greater and greater numbers and joy. So thank you.
Great.
So the next item on the agenda is Community Investment Program Funding Recommendation. Mark Price, our head of recreation, will discuss the process and the applications and the results of the Recreation Committee, correct?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. This year's Community Investment Program applications were submitted. We collected those a couple months back. There was a little lag in us making recommendations. We were waiting for our rec committee to be reappointed, so we actually did that in the last few weeks, and we all got together last week for our first meeting, and this was our first project, was to review these applications and make recommendations to council based on everyone's sort of opinions on who should be funded and not. What we did take was Paloma and Justice's sort of scoring matrix from last year. It was discussed at the committee level to sort of streamline it a little bit, and each committee member selected their top 4 recommendations for funding. Those have been compiled on the spreadsheet you're looking at. That's why Some of them have scores and some do not. That's based on 6 of the 7 members selecting their top 4, and we compiled those, and basically the summary, the sum of the applicants that, sort of, each of the committee members, wanted to fund first, is outlined there. So the top score to the smallest score is how we did that. Based on sort of the selections, then we looked at the amount requested and try to come up with a reasonable recommendation based on the amount funded and the type of application and what might be usable. So with all of that, we have 4 recommendations for funding that we wanted to bring to you guys for review. And those 4 are the Cornell Cooperative Extension Green Team Program, BVAC, or Beacon Volunteer Ambulance Corps, Compass Arts, and the American Legion Post 203 were the 4 top applicants, and the funds allotted between those making up $20,000, which is what we budgeted for.
And then just a little context for people that might be watching this and not have familiarity with the program. The council created the Community Investment Program in 2022 and funded it in the budget at $20,000. Last year, the City Council scored these with a matrix that Paloma had put together, came up with, I think, 4 top applicants that we funded, and then we got under contract with, and we granted those funds for specific activities. This year, we again put $20,000 in the operating budget. You had asked last year if this could now be scored by the Recreation Advisory Committee. We reconstituted that committee recently, and it now has 7 new members on it, 6 of whom participated in the scoring of this along with Mark. So just some context in case somebody's saying, well, what's this grant program?
And we also follow up on how the expenses have been used during the course of the year.
Yes, there's a simple but good overview of a report done at the end of the year that has to be submitted to say how the money was used, that it was in alignment with the budget.
On a related question, this might be a question for you, Nick. I know that you last year reviewed some of these applications to be sure it was appropriate and proper use of city funds. I didn't know if you've had a chance to take a look at these yet, just to make sure that if we went along with the recommendations, that it's in line with appropriate use of city funds.
Thank you. We did conduct that review and found that the 4 that have been ranked on the top of the chart there are appropriate use of public funds.
Great, thank you. Mark, forgive me if you said this. Can you say a little bit more about the criteria that you and the committee kind of used to decide which ones kind of rose to the top in terms of what you were looking for, or what gave some things an edge over other things?
Yeah, there were so basically in creating the spreadsheet, we took the application, which speaks to the different categories that we were willing to fund, and each of those categories were assigned to each of the applications. So that was like step 1, to make sure it was within categories that we had advertised for. Next was using last year's scoring matrix. There were like 3 criteria. Was it fitting for Beacon? Was it, looks like it was necessary? And I can't remember the 3rd criteria, but basically those 3 criteria were used to consider each of the applications. The difference from last year's to this year's, last year's scoring basically used each of those, and they scored each individually, so there were lots of different scores to compile. Everyone in the committee felt they could keep those in mind as they select their top 4. So, that was a little big, but I had the second sheet, which basically was, Beacon-based. Was there a need or a shortage of that type of programming? And then the last one is escaping me, but it was basically.
So the 3 criteria, I'm sorry, unless you want to go, were criteria 1 was impact, the greatest impact to most people in improving well-being and quality of life. Criteria number 2 was investment, capacity building as opposed to ongoing operations. Criteria 3 was quote-unquote beaconness, programs that are meeting a need that is otherwise lacking in the landscape of Beacon's existing programs.
Just because, first of all, thank you, Mark, and the whole committee for taking the time to review these applications. I hope it was a useful sort of first project for the reconstituted committee. I know that I think, everyone who reviewed the applications last year, it was really informative, but I'm glad that you all are sort of taking that step on. And so I just wanted to clarify a little bit. I think I just had two questions about the applications here. The sixth one down, rollout of FBS, was that the Foundation for Beacon Schools, or is that a different FBS?
Rollout for FBS, I believe, was fiscally sponsored by the Foundation for Beacon Schools.
Oh, okay. And I just wanted, do you recall like what exactly that application was?
It was based on arts in the schools. I believe there was a mural project involved.
Okay. And the, I guess I just also wanted to understand the amount, sort of the thought process for the amount recommended. Was that just based off of sort of taking into account the amount requested and then the rankings?
Ranking was trying to select the top four, looking at their budgets, like it was easy. BVAC, basically the request was for 6 EMT training courses. We decided, to go with 4, basically trying to get that, all 4. We could have stopped at the first 2 with the 20,000 allotment. So we basically were trying to share those funds between that. I know enough about the Green Team program to know that, that funding would be used in, in part or whole. So it was, we basically dropped that down to allow for funding, down the line a little bit farther.
Great, that makes sense. Just wanted to clarify.
Mm-hmm.
So if the council is good with the recommendations, we can bring a resolution next week, awarding the grant amounts, and then we would get under contract with them afterwards. And we kind of got a late start, so I would try to get the contracts out pretty quickly. And I just want to thank the committee for the work they did on this. It's great to finally have a reconstituted committee. It was nice to give them a discrete task that had a clear beginning and ending as their first task, and now we can kind of roll into some more complex planning. Yeah,
it was a great first meeting, and to have actionable, tangible work, right out of the gate, was very nice for me to sort of present to them. The goal of the committee is to be useful, and this was a great first task for that. Because there's outcomes that I could report back to them, and hopefully our next few tasks down the line will be similar. We'll have some real stuff to talk about and a direction to go.
Chris and Mark, I can't remember from last year when we did the vote and approved this, which I know we're not doing tonight. Did we invite those who we were giving awards to attend that meeting so we could thank them, just kind of as another form of public recognition of them?
No, I think we were, feeling our way through things last year, but that definitely wasn't. And the other note I have is to notify all applicants, sort of to outcomes.
Yeah, I have thoughts about even, for the ones who didn't make it, just sort of encouraging them. I'm not sure if it's the role of the city, but just wanting to make sure that even those who weren't successful this year, that we continue to feel like as a community they're being supported. So, but at least for the 4 that if we do decide those are the 4 we go to have them invited to have another form of public recognition for what they're providing for Beacon, if the city wants to recognize that. So.
How would you want that to play out?
I guess I would see it as an opportunity just for them to promote what they do. These are all established organizations, so if they just want to reiterate to the communities what they do, I think that could be an opportunity for a platform. I don't think it would be a defense of their application or a reiteration of this conversation. I don't think that would be useful, but just an opportunity if they want it to share what they do. I don't know what your
And would
vision
you
was,
want that
Molly.
sooner or later? Like, would you prefer that happen like in July or at the end of the grant period when they report out what they did?
Oh, that's a good question. I didn't have a thought in mind. Why don't we, over email, I can follow up and make a
Sure.
suggestion, and then we can see if that's, I don't think that's public business, Nick, the recognition of that. Is that okay for us to do over email and not publicly in a meeting?
I think that's fine, yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, because they have to prepare a report on what they did by the end of the fourth quarter, so
Oh, yeah, that
maybe
could work.
towards the end of the
Yeah.
year, we ask them to come in and just give an overview of what they did.
Great.
Then like Green Team, for instance, can talk about how many participants they had in the program and what they accomplished and things like that.
You're just suggesting the recipients, not all the applicants?
Yes, that was my thought. I have other thoughts about encouraging people to apply, but the idea for this year or for this cycle was just for the 4 that we happen to be funding, so.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay, cool.
Anyone else have any questions or anything? Mark? Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you, give our thanks to the committee, and we appreciate the work, and, yeah, it's good. Thank you.
And then Mark has one other thing that's relevant on the agenda that I'll just note. We are going to paint the Green Street basketball courts, and that is in your last item, which are budget amendments, and that's 100% covered by proceeds from films that we got in 2023. So I
That
just
was
want
a
to thank you for...
repaving project last year that we're going to surface now in acrylic coating, so it's...
Okay, so that, my question about that one was just it's sort of ongoing maintenance. It wasn't a particular thing that
Oh, it
happened
was
to
a
that field.
resurfacing of the basketball
Oh,
court.
and see, this is the,
Resurfaced
and this
last
is the
fall,
second
and this
part of
is a
that.
top coat that,
Great.
pretties it up and protects that surface for
Okay.
Yeah.
several years. And we're putting pickleball lines down.
Yes.
Just as an
Thank-
aside, because you brought up the movie revenues, would it be worth it at some point to kind of look at the criteria and stuff and the fees and so on that we have for that? Only because I know that there's a lot of movie studios opening up in Newburgh right now.
Yeah, we
And I
could.
think it's-
I would want to talk to Nick about an executive session conversation about that.
Right, because I think there's a lot of opportunity in here, and obviously it's good for the city.
Yeah, I mean, they mostly approach us, and we've had a good relationship with HBO and with the producer of Cold Harbor, Severance. We have another HBO up at the settlement camp. So when they come to us, we try to make sure it's not too onerous and disruptive. Like, people have come and wanted to close Main Street on a Friday in the summer, and that's a no.
Yeah.
That's a hard no. Or filming overnight in a residential neighborhood where they were going to run motorcycles up and down the street. That was a hard no.
That just happens naturally.
Yes. We don't get paid for that. So maybe we have a conversation in executive session, because some of that's, I don't want to transmit everything to these companies that
Right.
we put.
Yeah, I'd just like to stay ahead of it and see how we can capitalize this,
Yeah.
resurgence in the Hudson Valley of these film studios. as
Yep.
best we can.
We've been working with the Hudson Valley Film Commission when we have questions that arise of what's a reasonable fee, for instance, to use the bridge at Bridge Street. So they advise us a lot on location fees and what we should be asking for.
Right, right.
So, thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Have a great night.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, the third item on the agenda is the appointment of Amanda Caputo to the position of city clerk. I know there's a lot of people who are waiting for dog tax that are very happy about this.
They are going to be happy, yes. So Amanda came to executive session last week to meet with the council as she is being proposed to replace a department head. And she's been with the city of Beacon for more than 5 years, and 3 years as deputy clerk. Last year, we promoted her to be municipal secretary, and she has been doing the minutes and the preparation for all of the planning and zoning board meetings. We are now looking to promote her to be the clerk, and she has been essentially covering us during times that we haven't been staffed, and is just perfectly suited, ready to go into the job. She is a notary public, which is important for the job. She has an associate's degree from Dutchess in Business Administration and a bachelor's in Business Administration from SUNY New Paltz. So we think we have a great internal candidate. We did get we got scores of resumes on this. We did interview 4, and she was the consensus choice of the committee, which was Sarah Morris, who's our HR director, Susan, and myself, our finance director.
Chris, can you talk a little bit about the plan to transition for the person who takes the minutes for the planning board? As I know there are several members of our community who rely on those minutes if they're not able to attend or watch the meetings. So what
the position that Amanda holds now is called municipal secretary, and we are advertising for that position right now. It's a civil service position, and apparently there isn't a civil service list that we have to go by. There's too few people on it, so we can advertise it broadly. We're trying to get somebody in as quickly as we can for that position. Amanda is willing to help train that person and also ramp up as clerk while trying to get that person familiar with the minutes. So Amanda will deal with the minutes for this month. She's been very flexible about covering other things, so if we need that for July, I think we'll be able to ask her to do that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else have anything to say about that one? Okay, we'll go on to the 4th item, which is the appointment of Trevor Wood to the position of police sergeant. Chris?
Sure. So again, Trevor Wood came to meet you in executive session last week. We do that for all department heads. Police hires and police promotions. Trevor Wood is currently a detective in our bureau, and he is being proposed for promotion to police sergeant. He's spent 14 years as a police officer and served with the villages of Ellenville and Wappingers before coming to the city of Beacon 7 years ago. He is eligible on the civil service list. There is a list for the position. He scored highly enough that we can reach him on the list, and he has an associate's degree in criminal justice from Hudson Valley Community College. And by all accounts, he's been doing a great job, and the chief highly recommended him for promotion.
And born and raised in Beacon, correct?
Yes.
Yep. It's nice that it seems to be getting a lot of officers that were born and raised here in Beacon.
Yeah, who know the community, and, yep.
Do you know how many vacancies we have right now in the police department, or anticipated vacancies? I know there's been a lot of work to hire people, but some have been promotions, so I didn't know if that was something that...
I think at this point we have 2, but we'll have 3 when one of our officers retires in July.
Okay.
So we had narrowed that from 6 vacancies to 2, and we're waiting on a new civil service list. Civil service gave a new physical exam, and we're hoping for a new list that we can hire off. We basically went through the former list and hired, I think, what did we do recently? 3 or 4 hires, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we've hired 4, and then we're going to lose 1 next month, and we're going to lose 1 in the first quarter of next year. So we're continuously trying to hire to get up to full staff.
Do you happen to have any particular, just related to that, notes to share about where we're at with overtime?
No, and I'd like to do that as a different topic if we could.
Sure.
It just,
I know it's related to a couple different pieces of the
yeah, I
puzzle.
mean, if you want to add an item, I could, I'll have to run the numbers. We were still ahead of where we budgeted. So,
Yeah.
but again, in the summer season, we start picking up a lot of events too.
Yeah, I think you reported about it about a month ago, so that wasn't very long.
Yeah, typically, maybe I'll give you an update every quarter. So we'll see what June's number comes in, and maybe I'll give you an update in July if it makes sense. Okay, and then we have one more.
Yes, the fifth item on the agenda is appointment of Alyssa Rudden to the position of detective.
Yes, so Alyssa is a police officer with us, and she's being proposed for promotion to detective. She's essentially been doing the job since last May. We had one of our detectives who was out on an injury that was caused by a work accident. The person was rear-ended by a motorist, and Alyssa covered the detective bureau during that time and did a great job. Alyssa was previously with the town of Saugerties Police and then the city of Poughkeepsie. So she has 8 years as a police officer, 6 with Beacon, and she has extensive training and is certified as the procedural justice instructor for our department. She also has a degree from Mount St. Mary's, and again, you met her in executive session, which I think just conveyed what a great candidate she is for this position.
Okay, number 6 on our agenda is the extension agreement with Royal Carting Service Company for waste collection, and I believe Nick is going to have something to say about this.
Thank you, George. Yes, so the city of Beacon has a current contract and agreement with Royal Carting for the collection of the city's recyclables and solid waste from privately owned properties, municipal buildings, and public spaces within the city. That contract is currently on a 1-year term, and the city administration has been able to secure a further 1-year extension to cover all of 2024 at the same rate and terms as the existing contract. And so therefore, in your packet is a proposed resolution and draft extension agreement. And again, the good news is that this, in today's environment, is a good deal as it maintains the existing contract terms that were negotiated previously. And so this would be set for the council's consideration at your meeting next Monday for a vote.
Does anybody have any questions regarding this contract? Okay, the final item on the agenda is proposed amendments to the 2023 general fund budget.
So I just realized I did have just a comment that I wanted to say out loud, which is that I don't have any questions about this agreement, but as we near the end of this agreement, in another year, I would like to have a public conversation about our waste management in the city in general. I think we're very much going in a lot of great directions, including with our compost program, but just wanted to note that I'd be interested in that on the agenda before this resolution, this contract comes up again.
Great. Okay, Chris, you want to talk about the amendments to the...
Sure, George. So the first amendment of the 3 is to amend the general fund fire budget for emergency repairs that we had to do to our ladder truck. We were doing inspections of the aerial mechanism, and it appeared that we had a leak in the air compressor. When it went into the shop, which is very specialized, we also realized we had a replacement of a turbo motor that needed to be done, and the 2 power steering boxes had failed. So, again, as these apparatus age, we're ending up having to invest some money in them, and we're proposing to move $25,000 out of contingency to cover the repairs that were not otherwise budgeted.
How old is that vehicle?
I knew you were going to ask that. If I had to estimate, I think it's just under a decade old.
Okay. I mean, the larger question is, you mentioned wear and tear, and just,
Yeah.
is this the kind of thing that we would expect? Like, in a regular car, you expect the stuff to go out. I don't know a lot about fire apparatus, so a decade sounds like there's things that we need to
Yeah,
replace.
if memory serves, I thought it was 8 or 9 years.
Okay.
But
thank
I'm
you.
sure Tom Lucchese's going to text me and say, I really botched that. And we were covered while this was repaired. We had another department with a ladder truck backing us up while this was repaired. And it's a specialty repair that can't be done by our highway repair shop. So these are all specialized, and then they're certified because they have to work when they go into use. The second amendment is kind of a good news item. In the 2022-2023 state budget, the governor and the legislature put aside $1.2 billion to give what's called a healthcare and mental hygiene worker bonus to first responders and a lot of the people that got us through COVID. And as you may know, all of our career firefighters are also EMTs, and they're often the first responder to get to a medical emergency, sometimes well before the ambulance arrives. So Chief Van Voorst found out about this program, went through the necessary steps of applying for it, and we are getting a pass-through from the state of $50,057. And that is coming from state aid, and then we are passing it through to each of our employees. Most of the employees will receive $3,000, and there's a couple that were only partially vested for the time period, so they got weird amounts, which is why this isn't a round number. But it really was, our chief kind of, it was all on him. He found this, he applied for it, and then he obtained it.
It's a nice way to end his career here at the...
Yeah, and it's a nice bonus for our hardworking staff. They didn't get to sit home during COVID, and they were out in the front line, so it's well-deserved. The final amendment is the one we mentioned at the beginning, which is the moving of $15,500 from film permit revenues that were not budgeted. They were in addition to, I don't think we budgeted anything on that line because we didn't know what we'd have. And we are putting it towards the repair of real property in the Parks Department, which will be the repainting of the basketball court at Green Street. And so it will have the full court lines, it will be fully colored, and then Marcus also putting a pickleball court demarcation so that one could put up a net and then play pickleball there. And that's mostly from Pretty Little Liars. So thank you, Pretty Little Liars.
I should watch that.
You should.
Yeah.
And tell us all about it, because I've never seen it.
Okay, well, it looks like that kind of wraps it all up. We apologize for the brevity, but we expected our first item to last about an hour.
Yeah, we had put in an hour, so
Yeah.
sorry.
So I had nothing to do with making this meeting short.
No, you should take credit for it, George.
You
There's
should take
everything to
credit.
do.
Thanks, everyone, for watching and attending, and see you next week. Thanks.
Thank you, George.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, Nick.
Thank you. Good night.
Have a good night. Good night, Lee.
I was trying to get it to be a half hour.
Recording